Is that Jeff, Martha, or both of you?
Sorry, both of us.
All right. Good to have you with us. Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Beatrice. All right, let's get started. We are in Parshat Beshalach.
Why is this?
Can everyone see? That should be read as man, not man. So towards the end of the Parsha, after Kriyas Yansuf, after we read of the splitting of the sea, we have Bnei Israel complain for the first time. I was about to say again, but this is the first of their many complaints in the desert, and that is followed by the giving of the man. So, Dad, I don't know if you remember this. You had someone you worked with who every year today, the Tuesday of Parshat Beshalach, would send Parshas Haman as a segula. It's a special Kabbalistic tradition. If you recite Parshat Haman on the Tuesday of Parshat Beshalach, that it's a segula to get parnasa. It helps to get livelihood. So I don't know if anyone here read the Parshat Haman in that context today.
I don't remember that, but
yeah, you would always forward it to me every year. So I don't know how such things work, if you can do it Tuesday night or if you already missed your opportunity, but there are those who would be the entire chapter 16 of Shemot. You're welcome to do so and let us know if that works out for you or not. Someone today on one of the listservs I'm on circulated it, and someone else responded, I wouldn't quit your day job over this, but maybe it works. I don't know. So anyway, we're going to look at one specific element of Parshat Haman, of the Manna episode, and I think some interesting things emerge from it. So our first source is the psukim that introduce it, beginning of chapter 16 of Parshat Beshalach. Vayisume Elim, vayavo kol adat bnei Yisrael el midbar Sin, asher ben Elim uvein Sinai. Chamisha asar yom lachodesh hasheni l'teitam me'eretz Mitzrayim. So they go from Elim, and the entire nation comes to the Sin, or the Sinai desert, on the 15th day of the second month, from when they left Egypt. Vayilonu kol adat bnei Yisrael Moshe ba'al Aaron ba'midbar. They complained to Moshe and Aaron. Vayomer aleihem bnei Yisrael, mi'itin mutenu biyad Hashem be'eretz Mitzrayim b'shivtenu asir habasar v'achlenu lechem lasova ki yotzetem otanu el hamidbar hazeh lamit et kol hakal hazeh barav. So he should have kept us in Egypt, because there at least we had food. We were able to sit by the flesh pots and eat bread and be satiated. And you took us out to the desert to die of starvation. Right, so there's a lot we could explore about, is there any truth to this statement? Did they in fact eat well in Egypt? Or is this, where does this complaint come from? We're not going to focus on that right now, but that is one very interesting question, is where does this complaint come from? And is there any truth to it? Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Hineni mamtir lachem lechem min hashamayim, so the response that they get comes from Hashem via Moshe, and God says to Moshe, I am going to cause to rain down from heavens bread, and the nation will go and gather each day in order that I can test them if they will follow in my Torah or not. And on Friday they will collect double, because of they can't gather on Shabbos. So what I wanted to focus on is, what exactly is this response of Hashem? Hashem promises that he's going to cause bread to rain down from heaven, and that this bread that rains down from heaven will be a test. L'man anasenu, hayelech b'torati imo, so that I may test them if they will follow in my Torah or not. So what exactly is the test of the man? Any initial thoughts? Anyone have any ideas on what this test is?
Seems to be a test of trust,
Okay.
that the man really will come every day, day by day. But how that relates to keeping Hashem's will is an interesting question, because if they're really taking seriously the miracles that they saw, they realize they're dealing with somebody who's pretty powerful, and it'd be a good idea to follow the commandments anyway, out of gratitude or something.
Right.
But maybe the man gives them an opportunity for that gratitude every day. So perhaps it is meant to fuel the motivation for them.
Interesting. So Anne's saying two very interesting things. She's saying, A, perhaps the test is a test of faith, because the rules that God sets up is that you have to go every day, right? And you have to have that faith that I'm not going to gather more than I need for today, or you know, as we read later on, if they did gather more than they needed, it would not last till the next day. So it was teaching them a daily dependence on God for their sustenance, and then you get into, well, why would they need that, right? Why shouldn't they have come to a point of gratitude to God without having to be prompted to express it through this man? And that's a really interesting question as well. Any other thoughts on what the test of the man might be?
That they wouldn't go out on Shabbos. I mean,
Okay.
because that's very specifically stated here.
Right.
And gather it, although someone did. I think someone did, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So that means that they didn't hunt at all. I mean, there would have been some small game, and they didn't kill any of their herd animals that they went out with. They only ate man.
So that's a great question, right? In this same parak, we also read about the Slav, that God also sent
Right.
them quail, and
Yeah, well,
that's
that
very
didn't go so
unclear
well.
if that went so well. You know, if that was
Yeah.
punishment, or they had gotten too greedy. But and certainly once the Mishkan was built, there were korbanos, there were sacrifices that were offered, and those came from animals, and we know that they ate some of them. So was it, that's a great question. Was man the only food that they ate, right? Presumably not. Presumably they had other food.
Right.
And, when we get to the Mishkan, the whole question of how they got all the supplies for the Mishkan, and, right, many say, well, they must have been engaged in some sort of barter with other peoples in the desert in order to get the seal skins and everything else that was required for building the Mishkan. So, right, whether this was the only thing they had is a good question, but this was certainly the primary food, if not the only food. Right, but what you said at the beginning, right, that this might work the first 6 days, but then when Shabbos comes along and you have to change the rules, so then that might not be as effective. So maybe the test is, would they be willing to do exactly as God says? And that's we'll just that's basically what Rashi says. Rashi says, number 2, that I may test them if they'll follow my Torah, my law. If they'll follow, not that there's anything inherent in the man that is a test, but the test is all the rules associated with the man. If they'll follow all these rules. Right, such as not leaving over any extra from day to day, and not going to gather on Shabbos and gathering extra on Friday. So Rashi says it's exactly that, is that there's this miraculous thing, but it has some non-intuitive rules associated with it. And the test is, will they follow the rules? And that's what Rashi suggests. Before we go to the Ramban, who rejects Rashi, does anyone else have any thoughts on the test, what the test might be?
Maybe this was just getting them used to the idea that there are rules attached to food.
Okay, that's very possible. And That's a great suggestion, very much in line with Rashi. So we're about to reject that, but it certainly makes sense that, right, that the man might be their introduction into what halacha is all about and how they, what they should be preparing themselves for once they get into, quote, normal life outside of the desert. Right at this point, there was no 40 years of wandering. They were supposed to go pretty quickly into Eretz Yisrael. So that this might be prepping them for what the life of Torah is all about. I like that. Thank you, Judy. Okay, so let's see how the Ramban rejects Rashi. The Ramban says as follows. He first quotes Rashi and then says in the second line, Einenu nachon, he is not correct. Aval hu kemoshe amar, but rather he quotes, right, from Devarim, I think. Right, that God is described elsewhere in the Torah as the one who fed you man in the desert, asher lo yadu avotecha, which your forefathers did not know of. L'man anotcha, in order to somehow torture you or afflict you, u'leman nisotcha, hitivcha v'achavitecha, and to test you, to do good for you in the end. Ki nisayon hu lahem, shelo haya bi'adam mazon. It was a great test to them that they didn't have food readily available. They didn't have food accessible. So to your question, Rina, the Ramban seems to think that man was all that they ate. Right? It's a great test to be traveling in the desert without food. Right? Boy Scouts 101. Boy Scouts 101 is that you have to bring your canteen and bring a supply of food.
Canteen.
All they had in the desert was the man, which they didn't know of previously. They didn't learn from their ancestors, from their forefathers, that such a thing existed and that this could be their sustenance. And that it would come every day and that they would go and gather it. Right, and even so, they went and they followed in God's ways, and they didn't go searching for any other bread. So the Ramban says that the test of the man is, right, it could be put in a few different ways, but that basically this is unknown food to them, and it was putting their faith and their trust in God that this would sustain them. Right? Not only that it would fall every day, but that the man itself was something that could provide sustenance. Right? If you're given a weird food, no one wants to be the guinea pig to eat it first. And so the entire nation was made into guinea pigs to see if this would in fact sustain them and satiate them. And that's what the Ramban says was the test of the man.
Didn't their belief, wasn't that associated with the taste of the food? In other words, with greater belief, it'll taste better. It just does.
Right. So there are midrashim that talk about that. Right. There's the Torah tells us. Right. The Torah tells us that it's ta'amok etzapichit bidvash, that it tasted like dough with honey. But there are the midrashim we're all familiar with that the man would taste whatever you wanted it to taste like. And then different versions of that say, for the tzaddikim, it would taste like a 5-course dinner. And for the not so righteous ones, it would taste like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So there is that element as well, right? So the Ramban. Go ahead, Robert.
Sorry. It seems to me also that if the main food staple is being provided daily, the extras, portions, Erev Shabbos and so on, that means that there's no need to carry supplies of food along.
Right.
It means there's no need to farm in those places where they stayed for a season or a year.
Right.
In some instances, they wouldn't have to farm. The only thing they had to be concerned about was food for the animals.
Right.
That unless they could have manna as well. But it's a curious, strange thing. It's a fundamental change. They're living in a way which means that they are not subject to B'zeyat apecha. They don't have to sweat much in order to get food.
Right.
That's a
Uh,
major, massive blessing in contradiction to the curse on Adam and his descendants that they have to work.
Right, and that's actually a perfect transition. So we'll skip the other Ramban who said, says the same idea. So that's a great transition point to the Sforno in the Or HaChaim 6 and 7.
There we go.
The Sforno says, Mamtir lachem mazon, right, cause food to rain down, to fall down. L'man anasenu yelich b'torati, in order that I may test them if they'll follow my Torah. K'sheyemit parnes shelo b'tsar, when they are sustained and able to earn a living without having to worry about it. Omram zal lo nitna Torah ela le'ochlei haman. As the rabbis teach us that the Torah was only given to the generation that ate the man. In other words, right, they didn't have to worry about food. And the test was, what will be of Torah if you don't have any other excuses, right? It's very easy for us to make excuses. I'd love to learn Daf Yomi. I'd love to go to Shir. I'd love to be in Minyan. I'd love to volunteer. But what can I do? I have to go to work. I have to pay the bills. I have to, so the Sforno is saying that the man is a test of their true commitment. If all excuses, right, if everything else is taken care of, then will they really commit themselves and live a life of Torah or not? And he says that's, right, quoting this Gemara, that the Torah was only given to the generation that ate man, right? The Torah was given to generations that didn't have to worry about any material needs. And the Or HaChaim says very similarly, in number 7, Ki lechem min hashamayim lo yitzarich shum tikun, right? When you get your bread from heaven, you don't need to do anything else to it. Uvazeh yeh pnuyim mikol, and they'll be free from anything, from anything else, from all material concerns, and they would be able to study Torah, right? So this was the first kolel existence, right? The rent was taken care of, the food was taken care of, and they could just sit and learn Torah all day long, right? As I read this, I was reminded of a book. I know I've mentioned this book before. I think the author's name is Meir Tamari, who's an economist and a rabbi with Smicha, and he wrote a book called The Challenge of Wealth, right? And talking about all sorts of halachot of tzedakah and anything related, all the different halachot relating to various aspects of money, but right, the challenge of wealth. And I always say, well, I'd love to have that challenge to try to have to deal with, but in all seriousness, it can be a true challenge, and that so this is the challenge. The test was, if everything else is taken care of, then will they in fact live a life of Torah or not? That's the only way we can truly find out, because if there's concerns about having to find food, about having to earn a living, then you can always make excuses, and sometimes the excuses are legitimate excuses. So that's a second approach to what the test of the Manna might be. The third approach is based in the next source, number 8, the Mechilta. The Mechilta is interesting in its own right, and we have the problem. I need to do these source sheets better, because every time we go to one page to the next, we can't get the full source on our screen. But you don't want to waste too much space either. And I know some people print it out. We want to save paper, so we'll figure out a way to get that all there. I'm going to pick up in the Hebrew 3 lines in. In the English, it's Rabbi Eliezer the Moda'ite would say. The second Rabbi Eliezer HaModai. I think it's right at the top of the next page. Rabbi Eliezer HaModai Omer, Kol mi sheyesh lo ma yochal hayom, ve'omer ma ochal u'machar, harei ze mechusar emuna. Rabbi Eliezer HaModai would say, anyone who has what to eat today and ask the question, what am I going to eat tomorrow, is called one who lacks faith. Shene'emar, as it says, quoting our verse, that I may test them if they'll follow my Torah or not, right? Test is, I'm giving you in the here and the now. Can you focus and live in the moment and be grateful and recognize that you have food right now? Or all you're thinking about is where is my next meal going to come from? Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Shana Adam Shtei Halachot B'Shacharit, B'Shtayim Ba'aravit, V'Osek B'Malachto Kol Hayom, Ma'alin Alav Ke'ilu Kiyim Kol HaTorah Kula. Rabbi Yeshua says, from here, or maybe not from here, not clear exactly how he makes this connection, but if a person studies 2 halachot in the morning and 2 halachot in the evening, meaning studies a little bit of Torah in the morning and the evening, and is occupied with work the rest of the day, it's considered as if he or she has fulfilled the entire Torah. But you have to find balance because we don't have that. We don't have that benefit of a steady source of food, right? Presumably, that's where he's coming from. But that you can spend some of the time of the day learning Torah, some of the time working, and that's a great way to be. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, Lo nitna Torah lidrosh, ela le'ochlei haman. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says that the Torah was only given to be expounded upon, to be studied to those who eat the man. Ha ketzad, how does this work? Haya yoshev v'doresh, lo haya yodea mehechan ochel v'shoteh, mehechan haya lovesh mitkaseh. Right, they would sit and learn Torah without knowing where their food would come from, where they would get water to drink, where they would get food, clothing to cover themselves. Lo nitna Torah lidrosh ela le'ochlei haman. Right, so the Torah was only given to those who ate the man, because those who ate the man didn't have to worry about such things. Vishnayim lahem ochlei truma. Right. So he gives a much more radical approach, and he seems to be implying that we shouldn't be worried about our material needs, that we should strive to hit the level of those who ate man and didn't worry or didn't have to worry about material needs. And this is supported, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai gives a very similar position in a Gemara in Brachot that might be familiar to some of us, quoting in the pasuk from the Kriyat Shema, V'yasafta diganecha, you'll gather your grain. Ma'atamud Omar, what's the significance of the Torah telling us that we should gather our grain? Since God told Yoshua at the beginning of Sefer Yoshua that this Torah should never leave your mouth, and you should study it day and night. We might take this literally and think we have to literally study Torah every breathing second. That's why the Torah tells us that we should gather our grain. That's Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. That we have to have common sense. We have to balance Torah with our physical and worldly needs. That's Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, our same Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. If Shar Adam choresh bishat charisha, zorer bishat zariya, koser bishat katsira, dash bishat disha, zor bishat haruach, Torah mateh aleha. Right? All the activities that a farmer has to do, plowing and planting and reaping and harvesting. Right? You go through all these activities, you'll never have any time to study Torah. Ella, so rather, what does he suggest? When the Jewish people do God's will, then all their work, all their physical labor will be done by others. As it says that strangers, will stand and tend to your sheep and take care of everything. Sorry, I skipped a line. When they don't do God's wills, then they have to do their work by themselves. Not only that, but they have to do the work of others. So he seems to be saying that the ideal is to only be engaged in Torah study. That's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Right? The same Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, of course, we study on Lag BaOmer, who secluded himself in the cave for 12 years and came out and saw people working and set the world on fire. So he had a very extreme position, right? The Gemara here concludes, Amar Abaye, Harbe asuk Rabbi Shmuel v'al tabi adan, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai v'lo al tabi adan. Says many people followed the advice of Rabbi Shmuel to lead a balanced life, and they were successful, and they were able to study Torah, and they were able to earn a living, and it was all good. Those who followed Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai lo al tabi adan, they were not successful. Right? The kolo lifestyle is not one that you can rely on. Seems to be what Abaye is saying at the end of this Gemara. But anyway, we have this mechilta, we have the extreme position of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. What does that have to do bringing us back to the man? Let's go down to number 10, the Rashbam. Oh, this one we can get even though the page is split. Laman anasenu, so the Rashban commenting on our same phrase, Laman anasenu, that I may test them. Mitoch shebachol yom vayom einehem tluyot lemasnotehem el. Since every day they were dependent for food from God, mitoch kach yaminu bi v'yochlu b'torati. From this they'll come to believe in me and follow the Torah. And much like you said at the beginning, right? It's a test of faith. Kimoshe mifurash b'parshat Vayaikev, right? As we see elsewhere in the Torah in Parshat Ekev, that it was a test of faith, and that they, by being dependent on God for their food, it comes to teach them to believe in God and have trust in God. Even Ezra says,
excuse me,
yeah.
Does this imply then that only poor people who are dependent upon the daily blessings that they achieve, that they receive, that it enables them to have the food they need, whatever they need, on that day, and they're grateful for it, they're the only ones who can properly be said to be faithful. Those who are wealthy, those who've got huge IRAs, those who've got guaranteed this and that and the other, they have a harder time to be loyal, to be faithful, because they're distracted by
Their wealth.
the wealth, the comfort.
It goes both ways. I mean, certainly one could respond to you and say that someone who's wealthy and successful, if they see their wealth as a gift from God, can have the same sense of gratitude, and that they're lucky, they're fortunate, but that they're still dependent on God. All right. We could also point to many poor people who make excuses and say, they're just so consumed with trying to get by and focused on earning a little money that they also don't necessarily see God's gift in whatever little they do have or whatever they gain.
I had a teacher many years ago who, when he sat down to teach, the first thing he did after he sat down, he would realize he had to do something. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet that was very thick, and he would place it on the table in front of him. He could not teach if he had the wallet in his pocket.
Okay.
And he would only return it after he had concluded teaching for the day. It was a mystery that we talked about among the students in the class.
Yeah.
The answer eventually was that he kept his notes written inside the wallet. So if he forgot something, he could reach in immediately and find it. But it was interesting.
It was padded with lecture notes and not with dollar bills. Interesting. Okay. So along very similar lines, Ibn Ezra says, Anasenu, I will test them, that they will be dependent on me, they will need me every day. The Ramban in Sefer Bamidbar, where it also describes the man, similarly says, let's just get the English displayed for you. Afilu hamazon asher anu chaim bo, inenu biyadenu shetin afshenu teshinav v'svei abo, aval nitavelo, v'nisa inenu elav b'chol eitz. Right? Even the food that we do get by with and that sustains us, right? It's not ours. We don't have it in the fridge. We don't have a cupboard full of food. But even that food that sustains us, we need to reach out and ask God for it. We're dependent on God. Ki b'ulaya volanu, right? That maybe it will come, maybe it won't. There's still that lack of certainty. Okay, so the Ramban says, again, very similar things. Before I go to the last source, I didn't bring it here, but it does remind me of the Nachash, right? The punishment of the Nachash, of the snake in Gan Eden. What's the snake's punishment?
Crawl on the earth and eat dust.
You'll crawl on the earth and you'll eat dust. So, right, we don't know exactly what the snake was before the punishment as far as how it got around, if it had legs or what it did. But many people say eating dust, right, might not be the tastiest thing, but doesn't seem so terrible. The snake is given a guaranteed diet for eternity, right? Snakes don't, right? Snakes eat things other than dust, whatever that means, but they are given a guaranteed diet, a guaranteed source of nourishment. And so many say that the punishment of the snake wasn't necessarily that they were, right, that in their guaranteed source of food and guaranteed source of nourishment, that cuts off any dependence, any relationship the snake might have had with God. That every other creature has some, in the search for food, realizes that their support, this is clearly not a shot of the psyche of the snake, but that any creature that doesn't have a guaranteed food, has to search for food, has to hunt or whatever, that's sort of an intimation of a need for prayer and a need to recognize dependence on God or someone else, and the snake lost out on that. That was the snake's real punishment.
That's a passage in part of Borchi Nafshi.
Yeah, but snakes eat like mice, and
Right.
pythons eat whatever they want, including people.
Right. So that's why. So some say it means that the food isn't tasty. Again, I've never had the taste buds of a snake. I don't know what the mouse tastes like to the snake. But on the pshat, the Torah says that you're going to eat dust, and dust is the most readily available material, especially for someone that crawls on the ground. It's right there. So it's not so clear what the punishment was. So many offer that suggestion. Okay. Final source on what the test is comes from Haktav HaKabbalah. Liman Anasenu.
So I was just looking at.
Ein tam anasenu kedei le'amit haminaseh davar mesupak. Right? There's another problem by saying that the man is supposed to be a test. Because if it's a test, it implies, right, why do you give a test? To find something out. It implies that God doesn't know if Bnei Yisrael will follow the Torah or not. But God knows everything. God shouldn't need the man to tell us, to tell him if we're going to follow the Torah. God should know. God knows the future. God, right? Yes, they will follow, they won't follow. Right? So it's not a test for God to verify or to confirm any facts, because God doesn't need that. God has that already. God doesn't need a test to clear out any doubts that he might have had. He knows the future. Aval anasenu. So the meaning, the Kabbalah says of the test, is to tell or to confirm something for the one being tested. To make it clear to the ones being tested if they can withstand the test. Right? So God is telling Bnei Yisrael, I'm going to provide you this unnatural, miraculous food in the desert, and I'm going to provide it in a way that you won't have any security, right? Any storehouses, any pantry where you can store it, right? I'm going to provide it in this way that you'll be totally dependent on me. And so it's a test, not for God, but it's a test for us, for the generation that lived this way, to see if they could live under such conditions, if they could truly trust in God, if they were up to the task. Every day they were dependent, they were asking, seeking out their food. Im yelahem bitachon gamor b'Hashem. Right? It's a test of their confidence in God. V'zehu anasenu. That's the meaning of anasenu. Perush avi etchem lidei nisayon atzmechem. I will bring you to a test of yourselves. Yivurar lachem im kvar higatem lidei midat habitachon hagamor imlo. And it will be you will know if you've reached the level, the madrega of complete trust of bitachon in God. Robert or Beatrice, I don't know what the Yiddish phrase is that he writes next. I probably can't even say it either. Zilbist parzichen lesten. You see that
Where's it?
in the parentheses?
Ich selbst versuchen to allow yourself to taste or to try to get a taste.
Oh, essen. Essen is food, right? Yeah.
Why did you some?
All right.
Zilbus
It's
parzichen
Aramaic
lesten.
transcription of Yiddish.
Hine hanisayon vazel hotzi b'menuseh davar midat habitachon min hakoach el hapolal. So the point of this test, he says, was for the tested, for Bnei Yisrael, to realize their full potential. Right? It wasn't a test to verify for God, for the tester, if they would pass or not, but it was for Bnei Yisrael to see what their strength and their fortitude was. The trial involved in activating the potential faith of a believer is invaluable. Okay, so it was a test for the benefit, not for the benefit of God, but for the benefit of Bnei Israel to see if they were actually capable of living by God's standards and of having complete trust in God, which is a fascinating and very important way to look at what the test might be. All right. That's all I got. Any final questions or?
Many years ago, Rabbi Kaplan shared a little story with us. He talked about a man, I guess he knew, a brilliant diamond cutter, of course, in New York. And he would work as a diamond cutter, however many, maybe 2 days, maybe 3 days, and then he quit and learned Torah.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask a question about the word anasenu.
Yeah.
That's not the usual word for test, right? I was reading today. I got just about to this point, then I stopped. I didn't go all the way into the chapter, but it's if you look at the word, you see the word nace within it. That I couldn't help but be struck by the irony of that it would be. For the test might be that they would recognize it as a miracle, but or as if they pass, they get a flag to show that they
it's their flag to bear, right?
It's a lovely, rich kind of a word to think about, but basically it means to uplift. So that's why the connotation that there's another way, in other words, perhaps to understand the statement that you read about the Torah could only have been given to those who had partaken of the man, meaning that if somebody decided not to eat the man at all, they would not have been given the Torah at Har Sinai. We have the beautiful expression when we get there, as we know, that they all camped together as one.
Right.
So, and they all had their banners flying as they got there, and they went there. So I guess we passed the test. So I just wanted to offer that image.
Thank you. So just so everyone can see, Anne is noticing that the word anasenu has in it not just nisayon, a test or a trial, but has in it the word nace, which is either a miracle or is also in the Torah used to indicate a standard or a flag. So that's beautiful, and I think that very much ties in with what the Hakatav HaKabbalah said as well.
I was just thinking that the last statement that the Kabbalah suggests that when one follows some law or whatever, some rules from Hashem, he is not pleasing Hashem. He's satisfied of doing it himself.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. That's it for tonight. Thank you, everyone. A reminder,
Thank you, Rabbi.
tomorrow evening is our Tu B'Shvat Seder, 7:30 start time. The supply list and the link for that Zoom has been sent out. I'll probably send another reminder tomorrow. I hope everyone can join us for that. And we will see you again next week, Tuesday evening.
Okay,
So,
thank you. Good night.
good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you, Lila Tov.
Lila Tov.